Clutching the deed to a dilapidated farmhouse, his last desperate gamble from a tax auction, Jack Merritt turns his back on 15 years of city life to chase what everyone calls a fool's dream in the forgotten hills of rural Kentucky. What he begins as a reckless attempt to escape mounting debt leads him to a concealed chamber beneath the crumbling foundation, a room that hasn't been opened in over a century. What he doesn't realize is that the dusty trunks and faded documents hidden within aren't just antiques. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They're the long-lost collection of exiled European royalty who vanished during wartime upheaval. As local historian Eleanor Winters helps authenticate his discovery, Jack finds himself torn between instant wealth and revealing a historical truth that could rewrite history, but might cost him everything he's rebuilding. This unforgettable story explores how true legacy isn't measured in gold coins or crown jewels, but in the courage to honor the past while embracing an unexpected future. The eviction notice taped to his apartment door had the cold efficiency of modern bureaucracy: 30 days to vacate, no exceptions, no extensions. Jack Merritt stood frozen in the dim hallway, the rest of his mail clutched forgotten in his hand. At 42, he was facing the culmination of a slow-motion collapse that had begun 3 years ago with a company-wide layoff and accelerated through a series of increasingly desperate financial decisions. Inside his one-bedroom apartment, evidence of his unraveling life was everywhere. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, most containing unsold inventory from his failed online business venture. Vintage camera parts that had consumed his savings and maxed out 2 credit cards. His dining table had disappeared under piles of past due notices and rejected job applications. Jack dropped onto his worn sofa, mind racing through options that dwindled with each passing moment. His bank account held exactly $527.43, barely enough for a security deposit on another apartment, even if he could find a landlord willing to overlook his credit history. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister Caroline. "Mum's birthday. Dinner Saturday, you're coming, right?" He didn't respond. How could he face his family now? His father, retired after 40 years at the same manufacturing plant, had warned him against quitting his stable insurance job to chase internet millions. His mother, ever supportive but practical, had offered to loan him money 6 months ago, an offer his pride couldn't accept. His younger sister, with her suburban home and successful consulting career, had stopped asking about his business ventures, her silence more telling than any criticism. The next morning, Jack found himself in the public library using their computers to search for any housing option within his budget. The librarian, an older woman with kind eyes who had helped him navigate job search websites over recent months, paused beside his terminal. "You might find this interesting," she said, sliding a local newspaper beside his keyboard. "County tax auction this weekend. Properties starting at $500. Jack glanced at the circled advertisement without much interest. Probably condemned buildings or swampland. "Sometimes," she acknowledged. "But my cousin got a decent parcel that way when he retired. Said it was the best decision he ever made. Just needs someone willing to put in the work." After she moved on, Jack found himself studying the listing more carefully. Most properties were empty lots or structures with tax liens, far exceeding their value. But one entry caught his attention. Former Whitaker farmstead, 1.5 acres with structure. Starting bid $500, significant restoration required. The listing included a grainy black and white photo of a 2-story farmhouse with a wide front porch, clearly neglected, but with the sturdy lines of century-old craftsmanship. Something about the sagging roof and empty windows spoke to him. Another cast-off, another failure written off by the modern world. That night, unable to sleep, Jack found himself researching Pinewood County, Kentucky. Population 8,742. Median. Home price less than a third of what he'd been paying in rent. Unemployment slightly above national average, but cost of living significantly below. The Whitaker Farmhouse was located 3 miles outside the county seat of Millersburg, a town just large enough to have a grocery store, hardware store, and medical clinic. Photos on the county assessor's website showed a property that had been abandoned for at least a decade. Overgrown fields, weather-damaged siding, a collapsed outbuilding. But the main structure, built in 1887 according to the property record, appeared to have the solid bones of an era when houses were built to last generations. By morning, Jack had made his decision. It was madness, of course, trading his last dollars for a crumbling farmhouse in a place where he knew no one, with no clear plan beyond escaping the immediate crisis of eviction. But madness seemed preferable to watching the slow, humiliating collapse of his life play out under the pitying eyes of family and former colleagues. The auction was held in the basement of the Pinewood County Courthouse, a limestone building that looked untouched since the 1950s. Jack arrived early, his remaining cash withdrawn and folded into his wallet, an irrational fear nagging that someone would outbid him for the worthless property he'd somehow convinced himself represented his last chance. But when the Whitaker farm came up, the auctioneer's call for opening bids was met with silence. Jack raised his hand, voice steady as he offered $500. The auctioneer looked almost surprised, glancing around the room for competing bids that never came. 3 strikes of the gavel later, Jack Merritt was the owner of a derelict farmhouse nearly 400 miles from the city apartment he could no longer afford. Sold to the gentleman in the blue shirt, the auctioneer announced, already shuffling papers for the next property. See the clerk for deed transfer. Next. Item, vacant lot on Sycamore Street, delinquent taxes of $3,800. Jack moved toward the clerk's table in a daze, wondering if he'd just spent his last dollars on the most foolhardy decision of his life, or taken the first step towards something entirely new. Either way, there was no turning back now. 3 days. After the auction, Jack drove his 15-year-old sedan down the gravel driveway of the Whitaker farmhouse. The reality of his purchase looked even more daunting in person than in the county's photographs. Knee-high grass surrounded the structure, punctuated by the rusted remains of farm equipment, half swallowed by vegetation. The white clapboard siding had weathered to a mottled grey, with several boards missing entirely on the western side. The front porch sagged noticeably to the left, its steps partially rotted away. "Home, sweet home," Jack muttered to himself, parking beside what remained of a split-rail fence. After the auction, he'd spent his last $20 on a cheap motel room to research the property further and make arrangements. He'd terminated his apartment lease early, packed his few valuable possessions into his car, and said awkward goodbyes to neighbors who seemed unsurprised by his sudden departure. He hadn't called his family yet, unsure how to explain that he'd traded an urban crisis for a rural one. As he approached the porch, a truck slowed on the county road and pulled onto the edge of his property. An older man in work clothes stepped out, eyeing Jack with open curiosity. "You the fella that bought this place at the tax auction?" he called. Jack nodded, walking over to meet him. "Jack Merritt, Ray Donovan, own the hardware store in town. Saw your name on the deed transfer. Figured I'd stop by, see if you knew what you were getting into." The man's tone was friendly, but skeptical. "Honestly, not entirely, but it was this or nothing." Ray nodded, seeming to appreciate the candor. "Whitaker Place has been empty since old Tom died back in 2010. County's been trying to unload it for years. Nobody local wanted to take on the headache." He studied Jack's sedan with its city plates. "You planning to flip it?" "Don't have the money to fix it up enough for that. Just need somewhere to live while I figure out next steps." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Ray's expression softened slightly. Well, you'll need these then. He reached into his truck and pulled out a large flashlight and a crowbar. Power was cut years ago, and that front door's probably swollen shut from all the rain we had this spring. Jack accepted the tools with genuine gratitude. This simple act of neighborly consideration was more connection than he'd experienced in months of city isolation. Thanks. I appreciate this. Stop by the store tomorrow if you need supplies. We can work out terms if money's tight. With a nod, Ray returned to his truck, leaving Jack to face his new home alone. The front door indeed refused to budge until Jack applied the crowbar with careful pressure. It finally gave way with a groan of protesting wood, revealing a dim interior, thick with dust and cobwebs. The musty scent of abandonment hung in the air as Jack stepped inside, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The front parlor still contained heavy Victorian-era furniture draped in yellowed sheets. Picture frames hung askew on faded wallpaper, their subjects obscured by years of dust. The wooden floors, though dirty, appeared solid beneath his feet, a small mercy amid the overwhelming project he'd undertaken. Moving through the ground floor, Jack found a kitchen with ancient appliances, a formal dining room with a sagging ceiling, and a small study lined with empty bookshelves. Every surface told the story of hasty abandonment, followed by years of neglect. Upstairs, he discovered 3 bedrooms in various states of disrepair. The master bedroom's ceiling had partially collapsed, allowing rain to damage the floor beneath. The smallest bedroom, however, seemed relatively intact, its single window still keeping out the elements. This could work, he muttered mentally, designating it as his immediate living space. The basement door, located off the kitchen, opened to reveal steep wooden stairs descending into absolute darkness. Jack hesitated, testing each step carefully with the flashlight before committing his weight. The beam revealed a surprisingly large cellar with stone foundation walls and a packed earth floor. Old preserving jars lined rough wooden shelves along one wall, their contents long since turned to unidentifiable sludge. A rusted boiler squatted in one corner beside a coal chute sealed shut decades ago. Various tools hung from pegs driven into the support beams, forgotten implements from the property's working days. As Jack explored the basement's perimeter, his flashlight caught something unusual, a section of the stone foundation that seemed different from the rest. While most of the wall consisted of irregular fieldstone, this section featured more precisely cut blocks arranged in a suspiciously uniform pattern. Curiosity piqued, Jack moved closer. Running his hand along the stones, he felt a slight draft coming from between 2 blocks. Pressing experimentally, he was startled when one of the stones shifted slightly under his touch. "What the hell?" he murmured, applying more deliberate pressure. The stone block moved inward with surprising ease, revealing itself to be not stone at all, but a cleverly disguised latch mechanism. With a grinding protest of long, disused hinges, a section of the wall swung slowly inward, revealing a dark space beyond. Jack's flashlight beam penetrated the opening, illuminating what appeared to be a small chamber carved directly into the earth behind the foundation wall. Heart pounding, he stepped carefully through the narrow opening. The hidden room measured, perhaps 8 feet square, its walls reinforced with timber supports. Metal shelving lined 3 sides, holding what appeared to be wooden crates and leather trunks. But what captured Jack's attention was the object centered on a small table in the middle of the room. A tarnished silver box about the size of a bread loaf, its surface elaborately decorated with what appeared to be a coat of arms. As the flashlight beam played across the embossed design, Jack recognized elements that seemed European in origin. Shields, crowns and heraldic animals arranged in formal patterns. The workmanship was exquisite, even beneath decades of tarnish. With trembling fingers, he tried the clasp. It opened with surprising ease, revealing a folded document resting atop red velvet. The paper was yellowed but intact, covered in flowing script in what appeared to be French. Though he couldn't read the text, one element stood out clearly at the bottom of the page: a wax seal bearing the same coat of arms as the box, and a signature with the unmistakable flourish of royalty. Jack carefully refolded the document and looked around the hidden chamber with new awareness. These weren't just forgotten household items. They were deliberately concealed, preserved, and protected. Whatever he had stumbled upon carried significance far beyond the abandoned farmhouse above. For the first time since receiving his eviction notice, Jack felt something other than desperation, a spark of genuine curiosity, and with it, the faintest glimmer of hope. Jack spent the night in his car, unwilling to sleep inside the decrepit farmhouse until he'd had a chance to assess its structural integrity in daylight. As dawn broke over the Kentucky hills, he found himself staring at his phone, thumb hovering over his sister's contact information. After 3 attempts at composing a message, he finally wrote, "Got a place in Kentucky, rural fixer-upper. Will call when I'm settled." Caroline's response came almost immediately. "Kentucky? What are you thinking? Call me now." He silenced the phone and tucked it into the glove compartment. The conversation could wait until he had something more concrete to share than a derelict farmhouse and a mysterious hidden room. After a quick breakfast from his dwindling road supplies, Jack returned to the basement with proper tools scavenged from the old workshed. The hidden chamber looked different in the light of a battery-powered lantern, smaller but also more organized than his first impression suggested. The wooden crates were carefully labeled in faded ink, and the trunks were arranged in precise order against the walls. The silver box remained on the central table, its tarnished surface catching the lantern light. Setting it aside carefully, Jack began a methodical examination of the room's contents. The first trunk contained clothing of extraordinary quality, men's, suits and formal wear in styles dating from the early 20th century, expertly wrapped in linen and preserved with lavender sachets long since dried to dusty fragments. The second trunk yielded women's garments of equal quality, evening gowns in silk and satin, a fur-trimmed cape and accessories that spoke of significant wealth. At the bottom, wrapped in velvet, he found a jewelry case containing several elaborate pieces set with what appeared to be genuine gemstones. The wooden crates proved to contain household items of exceptional craftsmanship, silver tableware engraved, with the same coat of arms as the box, fine china with gilded edges, crystal glassware carefully packed in straw. One smaller box held personal items, fountain pens, a pocket watch, leather-bound journals written in French, and several framed photographs. Jack examined one of the photos closely. It showed a distinguished couple in formal attire, the woman wearing jewelry he recognized from the case he'd just discovered. The man's military uniform bore insignia and medals suggesting high rank or noble status. On the back, written in careful script, Luxembourg, 1938. By midday, the hidden room had yielded its basic inventory. Though Jack had barely begun to understand its significance, the documents remained largely indecipherable due to the language barrier, but their formal appearance and official seals suggested government or royal provenance. Retreating upstairs, Jack made his way to the small bedroom he'd identified as his temporary living space. He swept decades of dust from the floor, wiped down the window to allow in more light, and unrolled his sleeping bag atop the bare mattress. From his car, he retrieved a cooler with his remaining food, his laptop computer, and a suitcase containing clothes and toiletries. Sitting cross-legged on the sleeping bag, he opened his laptop. The property had no internet service, of course, but he downloaded research materials at the motel before arriving, Articles on property renovation, homesteading basics, and rural self-sufficiency filled his offline reading folder. Preparation for a life he'd never imagined until a week ago. As the afternoon light began to fade, Jack drove into Millersburg, following Ray Donovan's directions to the hardware store. The town center consisted of a single main street, with brick buildings dating from the early 1900s. Many storefronts stood empty, their windows dusty or papered over, but others showed signs of resilient small-town commerce. A diner, a pharmacy, Ray's hardware store, and a small grocery. Ray looked up from his counter as Jack entered, nodding in recognition. "Thought you might be back. Roof leaking yet?" "Probably, but I haven't been upstairs in the rain to confirm," Jack admitted. "I need some basics to make one room habitable while I figure out the rest." For the next hour, Jack filled a cart with essentials, cleaning supplies, basic tools, tarps to cover damaged sections of roof, a camp stove and propane, a solar shower bag, and 5-gallon water containers. Ray added items Jack hadn't considered: mouse traps, caulking compound for the windows, a carbon monoxide detector. At the register, Jack winced at the total. His credit cards were maxed out, and his remaining cash wouldn't cover half the supplies. Ray seemed to read his expression. "Tell you what," he said, lowering his voice, "I've got a storage problem. Previous owner ordered custom windows for the Prescott place, then backed out after they arrived. Non-standard sizes, so they've been gathering dust for 2 years. They'd fit your place if you're willing to install them yourself. You do that. Work, I'll consider it even for these supplies." The offer was transparent charity disguised as a business arrangement, but Jack was in no position to refuse. "I can handle installation. Used to help my dad with projects growing up. Good man. I'll drop them by tomorrow. Meanwhile, you should meet Eleanor over at the Historical Society. If anyone knows anything about that old place's history, it's her." As Jack loaded his purchases into his car, he noticed curious glances from locals passing by. A stranger in Millersburg was apparently noteworthy, especially one taking up residence in a property locals had written off years ago. At the grocery, Jack purchased the cheapest staples he could find: rice, beans, canned vegetables, coffee, powdered milk. The elderly cashier studied him with undisguised interest. "You're staying out at the Whitaker place?" she asked as she bagged his purchases. "Just bought it," Jack confirmed. "Brave man," she commented. "That house has stories, you know." "What kind of stories?" she shrugged. "Ask Eleanor Winters at the Historical Society. She knows all the old tales." Driving back to the farmhouse as dusk settled over the countryside, Jack realized how completely he had severed his connection to his previous life. No apartment, no business connections, minimal contact with family, and now a new identity forming around him. The brave man, taking on the abandoned Whitaker place with its untold stories and hidden treasures. That night, in his sleeping bag, in the small bedroom lit by battery-powered lanterns, Jack began photographing the items from the hidden room with his phone's camera. The silver box sat beside him, its coat of arms catching the light as he carefully documented each discovered item. Without internet access, identification would have to wait, but he wanted to record everything before making any decisions. As exhaustion finally overtook him, Jack drifted towards sleep with the realization that for the first time in years, his thoughts were entirely focused on possibilities rather than failures. Whatever these royal-looking artifacts represented, legitimate treasures or elaborate hoaxes, they had already given him something invaluable, a purpose beyond mere survival. The Historical Society of Millersburg occupied a narrow brick building on Main Street, its front window displaying artifacts from the town's founding days: a mill wheel fragment, sepia photographs of stern-faced pioneers, and yellowed newspaper clippings celebrating long-forgotten local triumphs. A hand-painted sign indicated operating hours of Tuesday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., or by appointment. Jack parked his car and checked his appearance in the rearview mirror. 3 days of farmhouse renovation had left him looking rough, unshaven, hair disheveled, clothes stained with the grime of decades he'd been cleaning from his temporary bedroom. But the silver box, tucked carefully in his backpack, deserved expert attention, and every local he'd spoken to had directed him to Eleanor Winters. A bell jingled as he entered the Historical Society, the sound seeming to echo through rooms that appeared empty of visitors. The interior smelled pleasantly of old books and furniture polish, its walls lined with glass display cases containing local memorabilia. Photographs of Millersburg through the decades showed the town's evolution, from thriving rural center to its current diminished state. "Hello?" Jack called, moving deeper into the building. "One moment!" A woman's voice responded from a back room. Moments later, Eleanor Winters appeared, carrying a stack of leather-bound ledgers. She was perhaps 60, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, wire-rimmed glasses, and the alert expression of someone accustomed to cataloguing details. She wore a cardigan despite the summer heat, and sensible shoes that made no sound on the wooden floor. "Welcome to the Millersburg Historical Society," she said, placing the ledgers on a nearby desk. Her eyes assessed Jack quickly, taking in his work-worn appearance. "You must be the new owner of the Whitaker place. Word travels fast around here." Jack nodded, extending his hand. "Jack Merritt. Sounds like you've been expecting me. Ray mentioned you might stop by. Said you were interested in the history of the property." Her handshake was firm and brief. Most newcomers don't bother with the past. They just tear down and rebuild. "I'm not planning to tear anything down," Jack assured her, "but I did find something unusual that I'm hoping you might help identify." He gestured to the small reading area at the center of the room. "Do you have a few minutes?" Eleanor's expression shifted from professional courtesy to genuine interest. "Of course, that's what I'm here for." As they settled at the reading table, Jack carefully removed the silver box from his backpack, placing it between them. Eleanor's eyes widened behind her glasses, her hands automatically reaching toward the object before stopping just short of touching it. "May I?" she asked, scholarly discipline overcoming her initial surprise. Jack nodded, and Eleanor gently turned the box to examine the coat of arms embossed on its lid. Her fingers traced the design with practiced care. "Where exactly did you find this?" she asked, voice carefully neutral. "In a hidden room in the basement of the farmhouse. There's more. Trunks of clothing, household items, documents in French. All behind a false wall in the foundation." Eleanor looked up sharply. "A hidden room? The original foundation from 1887? Seems that way, though the room itself looks like it might have been added later, early 1900s maybe." Eleanor opened the box with reverent care, examining the document inside without removing it. "This is extraordinary," she murmured. "The seal appears genuine, Belgian or Luxembourgish, from the design elements." She looked up at Jack. "The Whitaker family has owned that farm since it was built. Thomas Sr. died in 2010, but his father, Frederick Whitaker, was quite a prominent citizen here in the 1930s and 40s. He served as mayor briefly." "Would he have had connections to European royalty?" Jack asked. Eleanor closed the box gently. "That's the fascinating question. There are local stories, largely dismissed as tall tales, about Frederick Whitaker hosting distinguished foreign visitors during the early years of World War II. Millersburg was very isolated then, much more so than today." She rose and moved to a filing cabinet, retrieving a folder labeled Whitaker Family. Inside were newspaper clippings, property records, and faded photographs. She selected one and placed it before Jack. This was taken in 1940 at the Founders' Day celebration. Frederick Whitaker is third from the left. Jack studied the photograph, then reached into his pocket for his phone. He pulled up one of the images he'd photographed the previous night, the formal portrait of the European couple. Placing the phone beside the Historical Society's photograph, he pointed to a man standing somewhat apart from the main group. "Is that the same man who's in this picture?" Eleanor put on reading glasses for a closer look, then nodded slowly. "It appears to be. Where did you get this image?" "It was in the hidden room, along with these." Jack showed her photographs of several other items: the jewelry, the formal clothing, the household goods with the matching coat of arms. Eleanor's professional composure slipped momentarily, revealing genuine excitement. "Mr. Merritt, I believe you may have discovered something of significant historical importance." She gestured to the coat of arms. "This appears to be the royal insignia of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. During World War II, the Grand Ducal family fled the Nazi invasion, many finding refuge in the United States. Some of their possessions were scattered for safekeeping." "You think I found royal possessions hidden in a Kentucky farmhouse?" Jack asked incredulously. "It's not as far-fetched as it sounds. Many European nobles had unexpected American connections, and Frederick Whitaker was known to have traveled extensively in Europe before the war as a purchaser for tobacco companies." She studied him thoughtfully. "These items, if authentic, would have significant historical and monetary value. Have you considered what you'll do with them?" The question caught Jack off guard. In truth, his immediate financial pressures had led to fantasies of quick sales to private collectors, a way to fund the farmhouse renovation and stabilize his precarious situation. But Eleanor's evident reverence for the historical significance gave him pause. "I haven't decided," he admitted. "I'm still trying to understand what I've found." Eleanor nodded, seemingly satisfied with his honesty. "I'd like to help document these items properly, if you'll permit it. I have contacts at the State University who could assist with authentication without requiring you to surrender possession." She hesitated, then added, "The Whitaker farm has many stories, Mr. Merritt. It seems you've discovered one of its most intriguing chapters." As Jack prepared to leave, Eleanor handed him a business card. "My personal number is on the back. Call anytime if you find more items or have questions." Her expression became more personal, less the professional curator. "And be careful. Valuable historical discoveries can attract unwanted attention." Driving back to the farmhouse, Jack pondered this warning. His discovery had seemed like an isolated stroke of luck, a private windfall in a forgotten corner of rural Kentucky. But now it appeared to connect to larger historical narratives: royal refugees, wartime secrets, and local mysteries that had persisted for generations. The farmhouse looked different to him as he approached, no longer simply a desperate last resort. The sagging porch and weathered siding now seemed to guard secrets deliberately entrusted to this remote location. He parked beside the tarp-covered windows Ray had delivered that morning, ready to be installed as part of their arrangement. As Jack stepped onto the porch, movement caught his eye. A black SUV with tinted windows, driving slowly past the property. It continued down the road without stopping, but something about its urban sleekness amid the rural landscape struck Jack as decidedly out of place. For the first time since discovering the hidden room, Jack felt a flicker of unease. He carefully locked the basement door before beginning work on the windows, the silver box and its mysterious contents secure in his backpack until he could determine a safer storage solution. The farmhouse's walls had kept secrets for over 80 years. Now he was part of that legacy of protection, whether he had intended it or not. The next week passed in a blur of physical labor and careful documentation. Jack divided his days between essential repairs to make the farmhouse habitable and methodical cataloging of the items from the hidden room. With Eleanor's guidance, he created a proper inventory, photographing each artifact and recording detailed descriptions. The collection was even more extensive than his initial assessment suggested. Behind the trunks of clothing, he discovered a concealed compartment containing a small wooden case. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay a tiara of extraordinary craftsmanship, platinum filigree set with diamonds and sapphires arranged in a floral pattern. A matching necklace and earrings accompanied it, along with a handwritten note in French that Eleanor translated as, "For safekeeping until our return, with eternal gratitude, M." The workmanship is consistent with royal jewelers of the period, Eleanor explained, examining the pieces through a jeweler's loupe she'd brought from the Historical Society. The sapphires appear to be Burmese in origin, the most valued variety, and the setting style is distinctly European, circa 1920s. "What would something like this be worth?" Jack asked, the question he'd been carefully avoiding finally slipping out. Eleanor removed her glasses thoughtfully. "To the right collector, potentially millions. To museums or the Luxembourg government, beyond price given the historical significance." She studied his expression carefully. "You're thinking about selling?" It wasn't a question, but Jack felt compelled to explain. "I'm not exactly flush with renovation funds. The roof needs replacing, the electrical system is a fire hazard, and winter's coming eventually." "I understand practical concerns," Eleanor said, her tone neutral. "But consider this. These items were entrusted to the Whittaker family for protection during one of history's darkest periods. That trust has now passed to you. Whatever decision you make should honor that legacy." The gentle rebuke lingered with Jack as he continued exploring the farmhouse in the days that followed. The property was revealing itself gradually, not just the hidden treasures in the basement, but the bones of the house itself. Beneath layers of neglect, he discovered quality craftsmanship, quarter-sawn oak floors, hand-carved moldings, built-in cabinets with dovetailed joints executed with precision. During one of his daily trips to town for supplies, the elderly cashier at the grocery store, Martha, mentioned that her grandfather had worked as a carpenter on the Whittaker place. "He always said Frederick Whittaker insisted on the finest materials, even for parts nobody would ever see," she recalled, bagging Jack's purchases. "Grandpa thought it strange at the time, building such a fine house so far from town. Said Mr. Whittaker told him, 'Some things are meant to last beyond our understanding of why.'" That evening, examining the hidden room with fresh perspective, Jack noticed something he'd overlooked, a small bronze plaque mounted discreetly on the inside of the false wall. Nearly black with tarnish, it had blended into the surrounding shadows. He cleaned it carefully with a soft cloth, revealing an inscription in French, "Refugium in tempore belli." 1940. Eleanor translated it the next day. "Refuge in time of war." "This confirms my theory," she said excitedly. The hidden room was specifically created to conceal these royal possessions during World War II. Frederick Whittaker must have had direct connections to the Luxembourg royal family. As Jack and Eleanor documented the final items from the room, they discovered a leather portfolio containing architectural drawings, detailed plans for the hidden room's construction, dated March 1940, just months before Luxembourg's invasion. More surprisingly, the portfolio contained photographs of Frederick Whittaker, with several elegantly dressed Europeans at what appeared to be the farmhouse itself. "This is extraordinary," Eleanor whispered, examining the images. "This appears to be Grand Duchess Charlotte herself, and possibly other members of the royal family." She looked up at Jack, her scholarly reserve giving way to genuine excitement. "They were here, in this house. These aren't just random items sent for storage. This was an actual refuge prepared for Luxembourg's royal family." The revelation transformed Jack's understanding of his impulsive purchase. The dilapidated farmhouse wasn't merely a desperate last resort. It was a site of genuine historical significance, a secret waypoint in a royal family's flight from Nazi persecution. That night, unable to sleep despite physical exhaustion, Jack sat on the farmhouse's front porch, contemplating the responsibility that had unexpectedly fallen to him. The property's isolation, once seeming like a disadvantage, now appeared deliberate. A strategic choice for a refuge meant to remain hidden from the world. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. "It's been 2 weeks. Call us. Mom's worried sick." With a sigh, Jack dialed Caroline's number. "Finally!" Her voice exploded through the speaker. "What the hell, Jack? You disappear, send a cryptic text about moving to Kentucky, and then radio silence. Mom thinks you've joined a cult." "I'm fine," Jack assured her. "Just busy with the new place." "New place?" Caroline repeated skeptically. "You mean the rural fixer-upper you mentioned? What exactly is going on, Jack?" He hesitated, unsure how to explain his situation without sounding completely unhinged. "I bought a farmhouse at a tax auction. It needs work, but it has potential." "With what money? Last I heard, you were facing eviction." "It was cheap, $500. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "Look," Jack continued, "I know it sounds crazy, but I'm figuring things out. The house has some historical significance that might make it more valuable than I initially thought." "Historical significance," Caroline echoed flatly. "In rural Kentucky?" "Yeah. Connected to European royalty during World War II, actually." Another long silence. "You know what? I'm coming to see this place next weekend. Send me the address." Her tone brooked no argument. "And call Mom tonight. She deserves to hear your voice." After ending the call, Jack sat in the darkness listening to the night sounds of rural Kentucky, so different from the urban noise he'd grown accustomed to. Crickets chirped in the overgrown fields, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The black SUV he'd noticed earlier in the week had passed by twice more, never stopping, but always slowing near his property. The farmhouse didn't feel like his yet, more like a place where he was temporarily serving as caretaker. But for the first time since his arrival, he found himself thinking beyond immediate survival, imagining what the property could become with proper restoration. The royal treasure hidden beneath the floorboards represented potential financial salvation. But it had also become something more, a tangible connection to history, a responsibility inherited alongside the deed to the land. Whatever decision he made about the artifacts would define not just his financial future, but his character. As the moon rose over the Kentucky hills, Jack made his way back inside, past the new windows installed with Ray's help, across floors. He'd swept clean of decades of dust to the small bedroom that now felt almost comfortable. For the first time since losing his apartment, he fell asleep with a sense of purpose stronger than desperation. Eleanor Winter's involvement in Jack's discovery quickly evolved from professional courtesy to genuine partnership. Her knowledge of local history provided context that transformed random artifacts into a coherent historical narrative, while Jack's practical approach to securing and preserving the items complemented her academic expertise. 3 days after their initial meeting, Eleanor arrived at the farmhouse with reinforcements. Dr. Marcus Chen, a materials conservation specialist from the State University. "I've known Marcus for 20 years, Eleanor explained as they stood in the driveway. "He's discreet, knowledgeable, and owes me several favors." She lowered her voice. "I've told him only that we've discovered potentially significant historical items needing assessment. The details remain between us for now." Dr. Chen, a soft-spoken man in his 50s with meticulous attention to detail, examined the hidden room with professional reverence. His portable testing equipment allowed preliminary authentication without removing items from the property. "The textiles show correct period dyes and weaving techniques," he confirmed, examining a formal gown under specialized lighting. "The metal composition of the silver items matches European standards from the period." Nothing immediately suggests forgery or reproduction. He was particularly interested in the documents, carefully photographing them for later analysis. The paper composition, ink formulation, and seal materials all appear consistent with official Luxembourg government documents from 1935-1940. After Dr. Chen departed with promises of confidential laboratory confirmation, Eleanor turned to Jack. With renewed enthusiasm, "This is even more significant than I initially thought. These aren't just royal possessions. They're historical artifacts documenting Luxembourg's government in exile." Jack nodded, still processing the implications. "But why here? Why this farmhouse in the middle of nowhere? That's what we need to discover." Eleanor pulled a thick folder from her bag. "I've brought everything the Historical Society has on Frederick Whittaker. There must be connections we're missing. They established a research headquarters in the farmhouse dining room, spreading documents across the table Jack had cleaned and restored. Local newspaper clippings, property records, business ledgers, and family photographs created a timeline of Frederick Whittaker's life. He wasn't just a tobacco buyer, Eleanor discovered, examining business correspondence. He represented several American companies in Europe throughout the 1930s. He traveled extensively in Luxembourg, Belgium, and France. Jack found a photograph showing Frederick receiving an award from what appeared to be a European dignitary. "What's this?" Eleanor examined it closely. "That's the Order of the Oak Crown, a Luxembourgish honor typically given for service to the Grand Duchy. The question is, what service did Frederick provide to receive such recognition?" As they pieced together Frederick's history, a picture emerged of a man with deeper connections to Europe than anyone in Millersburg had realized. His tobacco purchasing had apparently been supplemented, perhaps even fronted, by diplomatic missions and private arrangements with European governments, increasingly concerned about Nazi Germany's expansionist threats. "Look at this," Jack said, pointing to a deed transfer from 1939. Frederick doubled the property's acreage just months before war broke out in Europe. He also renovated the basement that same year. "Preparing the refuge," Eleanor murmured. "He must have known they might need sanctuary." The story they were reconstructing was remarkable. Frederick Whittaker, ostensibly a tobacco company representative from rural Kentucky, had established himself as a trusted ally of Luxembourg's royal family. When Nazi invasion threatened, he had prepared a potential refuge half a world away from the conflict. A farmhouse deliberately isolated yet accessible, modified with a hidden room that could secure both valuable possessions and, if necessary, people. "The Grand Duchess never came here," Eleanor concluded after studying immigration records. "She went to London, then Canada, before returning to Luxembourg after liberation. But clearly, preparations were made for that possibility. And the treasures were left here for safekeeping," Jack added, "then somehow forgotten or abandoned after the war." "Not forgotten," Eleanor corrected. "Deliberately left untouched. Look at this." She pointed to a letter dated 1947, addressed to Frederick from a Monsieur Dupont with a London postmark. It references items remaining in your safekeeping until properly claimed by authorized representatives. Frederick was instructed to maintain secrecy until formal diplomatic channels were re-established. Jack frowned. But that was 75 years ago. Why wasn't the collection ever reclaimed? "Perhaps Frederick's death disrupted the arrangement," Eleanor suggested. "He passed away in 1951, a heart attack while working in the fields. His son, Thomas Sr., inherited the farm, but may not have known about the arrangement with Luxembourg officials." Their research continued into the evening, illuminated by the new electric lamps Jack had installed. Eleanor's professional distance had evolved into passionate engagement with the mystery, her scholarly knowledge animated by the thrill of discovery. "You know," Jack said as they paused for coffee, When I bought this place, I was just looking for somewhere cheap to live after losing everything. I never expected—" He gestured to the documents spread across the table. "Historical discoveries rarely arrive when we're looking for them," Eleanor replied with a small smile. "They find us when we're ready to see them." The farmhouse felt different with Eleanor's presence, less a burden of deferred maintenance and more a container of stories, waiting to be honored. Her respect for the property's significance had begun to influence Jack's perception, shifting his focus from immediate financial concerns to broader questions of preservation and responsibility. As darkness fell, Eleanor reluctantly prepared to leave. "I should get back to town. There's a county historical commission meeting tonight, purely routine, but I should make an appearance." "I appreciate all your help," Jack said, walking her to her car. "I wouldn't have understood half of what I found without your expertise." Eleanor hesitated before opening her car door. "Jack, I should mention something. There's been talk in town about you and the farmhouse. Small communities notice everything, and your arrival and immediate connection to me has sparked curiosity. Is that a problem?" "Not necessarily, but discretion remains advisable. Valuable historical artifacts have a way of attracting attention, not all of it welcome." As if confirming her warning, headlights appeared on the rural road, slowing as they approached the property. The black SUV Jack had noticed previously cruised past, windows tinted against identification. Eleanor watched it disappear around the bend. "That vehicle isn't local." "It's passed by several times since I moved in," Jack admitted. "Never stops, just slows down." "Be careful," Eleanor said, her expression concerned. Whatever Frederick Whitaker was protecting might still need safeguarding. She handed him a small card. "This is the direct number for Sheriff Donovan, Ray's cousin. If you have any concerns, call him immediately." After Eleanor left, Jack secured the farmhouse more carefully than usual, checking doors and windows before returning to the dining room to review what they'd discovered. The connection between Frederick Whitaker and Luxembourg's royal family now seemed undeniable, but questions remained. Why had the collection never been reclaimed? Who else might know about its existence? And most pressingly, what were his responsibilities? As its current custodian, the black SUV's repeated appearances suggested someone else was already interested in the property or its contents. Jack's discovery, intended to remain between himself and Eleanor, had somehow attracted outside attention. As he carefully returned the documents to Eleanor's folder, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the peaceful isolation of the farmhouse might soon be disrupted. For the first time since moving in, he checked that the baseball bat he'd brought from his apartment was within easy reach before settling in for the night. The next morning, Jack awoke to the sound of tires on gravel. Peering through the bedroom window, he was relieved to see Eleanor's sedan rather than the mysterious SUV. She wasn't alone. An elegant older woman emerged from the passenger side, surveying the farmhouse with evident interest. Jack hurried downstairs, running a hand through his hair in a futile attempt to look presentable. By the time he reached the porch, Eleanor was already introducing her companion. "Jack, this is Dr. Margaret Becker from the Luxembourg Cultural Heritage Foundation. She's visiting the university this month, and when I mentioned our discovery, in general terms only, she expressed interest." Dr. Becker extended her hand. In her 70s, she carried herself with the poised dignity of someone accustomed to academic respect. "Mr. Merritt, thank you for allowing this unexpected visit. Eleanor has been deliberately vague about your discovery, but suggested it might connect to my country's wartime history." Jack hesitated, looking questioningly at Eleanor. "Dr. Becker has the highest security clearance with Luxembourg's National Archives," Eleanor explained. "If anyone can help authenticate these items properly, it's her." Jack nodded slowly. "Please come in." In the farmhouse dining room, now functioning as a makeshift research center, Dr. Becker examined the silver box with evident recognition. "This bears the personal seal of Grand Duchess Charlotte," she confirmed, her accent becoming more pronounced with emotion. "My grandfather served in her cabinet during the exile government." When Jack carefully revealed the tiara and accompanying jewelry, Dr. Becker's professional composure momentarily faltered. "These were believed lost during the Nazi occupation," she whispered. "They belong to the Grand Duchess's personal collection. Family, heirlooms rather than state treasures." As they shared their findings about Frederick Whittaker's European connections, Dr. Becker filled crucial gaps in their understanding. The Grand Duchy maintained unofficial diplomatic channels with trusted Americans before our formal alliance. Men like your Mr. Whittaker provided invaluable assistance, preparing evacuation routes and secure locations for both people and cultural treasures. She examined the 1947 letter with particular interest. This Monsieur Dupont was almost certainly Marcel Dupont, who served as cultural attaché in the post-war government. His instruction to maintain secrecy was standard protocol until proper diplomatic channels could be established. "But why wasn't the collection ever reclaimed?" Jack asked. Dr. Becker's expression turned somber. "The immediate post-war years were chaotic for European governments. Documentation was lost, officials were reassigned or perished, priorities shifted toward rebuilding. Marcel Dupont himself died in a car accident in 1948, possibly before arrangements for retrieval could be completed." She carefully returned the letter to its folder. When Frederick Whittaker died in 1951, the knowledge of this collection likely died with him. His son would have had no reason to discover the hidden room unless explicitly told of its existence. "So these items have been effectively lost for over 70 years, Eleanor summarized. "Officially missing from Luxembourg's cultural inventory," Dr. Becker confirmed. "Their discovery represents a significant historical recovery." The implication hung in the air. These weren't just valuable antiques, they were national treasures of Luxembourg, artifacts that belonged in museums or royal collections rather than a rural Kentucky farmhouse. Jack felt the weight of responsibility increasing. "What happens now?" he asked. "Legally speaking, who owns these items?" Dr. Becker considered the question carefully. "Property law in such cases is complex. You own the farmhouse and technically anything found within it. However, Luxembourg could certainly make a diplomatic claim based on historical ownership and the circumstances of the item's placement here. A claim that could take years to resolve through courts," Eleanor added. "Precisely," Dr. Becker agreed. "Such matters are rarely straightforward." She turned to Jack with a penetrating gaze. "But perhaps the more important question is not legal ownership, but ethical stewardship. These items represent my country's cultural heritage during its darkest hour, tangible connections to a time when Luxembourg's very existence was threatened." The statement wasn't accusatory, but Jack felt its moral weight nonetheless. His initial fantasy of selling the items for personal gain seemed increasingly problematic in the face of their historical significance. "I need time to consider the best path forward," he said finally. Dr. Becker nodded, apparently satisfied with his response. "That is all anyone could ask. Meanwhile, with your permission, I would like to document these items properly for Luxembourg's historical archives, regardless of their ultimate disposition." As Dr. Becker photographed and catalogued the collection, with Eleanor's assistance, Jack retreated to the porch, needing space to think. The farmhouse renovation had stalled while he focused on the historical discovery, but winter wasn't far off. The roof still leaked, the electrical system remained dangerously outdated, and his financial reserves had dwindled to almost nothing, yet selling the collection now felt impossible. These weren't just random valuables, they were artifacts deliberately entrusted to Frederick Whittaker's protection. a responsibility that had somehow passed to Jack alongside the property deed. Caroline's arrival the following weekend coincided with an unexpected visitor. Jack had just finished giving his sister a tour of the farmhouse, enduring her incredulous comments about his impulsive purchase, when Ray Donovan's truck pulled into the driveway, followed by a police cruiser. "That's Sheriff Donovan," Jack explained as they stepped onto the porch. "Ray's cousin." The sheriff, a stockier version of Ray with the same direct gaze, nodded in greeting. "Mr. Merritt." "Ma'am, sorry to interrupt your weekend, but we've had reports of suspicious vehicles in the area. Thought I should check if you've noticed anything unusual." Jack described the black SUV that had made repeated passes by the property. Caroline listened with growing concern, her earlier skepticism about Jack's rural relocation transforming into protective, sisterly worry. "Any idea who might be interested in an abandoned farmhouse?" the sheriff asked. Jack hesitated. "Actually, I found some valuable items on the property. Eleanor Winters from the Historical Society has been helping me document them." Sheriff Donovan's expression shifted subtly. "Eleanor mentioned you'd discovered some historical artifacts. Didn't say they were valuable enough to attract outside attention." "We've been discreet," Jack assured him. "Only Eleanor and a Luxembourg historian know the full extent of what I found." "Luxembourg," Caroline interjected. "You weren't kidding about European royalty." The conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of an engine. All four turned to see a black SUV approaching along the rural road. Unlike previous occasions, it slowed to a complete stop at the farm's entrance. Sheriff Donovan positioned himself between the vehicle and Jack's group, hand resting casually near his sidearm. "Stay here," he instructed, walking toward the SUV. The driver's window lowered to reveal a middle-aged man in a business suit who engaged briefly with the sheriff before being directed to park beside the police cruiser. As he exited his vehicle, his professional demeanor and city clothing looked distinctly out of place against the backdrop of the weathered farmhouse. "Mr. Merritt," he called, extending his hand. "Henry Richards, representing Whitaker Heritage Enterprises. I've been trying to locate you for several days." Jack stayed on the porch, maintaining distance. "What's Whitaker Heritage Enterprises?" "A family corporation established by Thomas Whitaker Jr. before his passing last year. I'm the executor of certain family trusts." Richards produced a business card. "We recently became aware of your purchase of the Whitaker property and have a matter of some importance to discuss." Sheriff Donovan examined the card with deliberate slowness. "Funny timing. You showing up just when valuable items are discovered on the property." Richards appeared genuinely confused. "Valuable items? I'm afraid I don't follow. I'm here regarding certain legal provisions in the Whitaker family trust that may affect Mr. Merritt's ownership claims." The revelation sent a chill through Jack. After weeks of work and discovery, after beginning to envision a future connected to this property and its history, the foundation of his new beginning might be built on legal quicksand. Caroline stepped forward, professional instincts from her, consulting career activating. "My brother will need to review any claims with his attorney before discussing this further." Richards nodded respectfully. "Of course. Please have your representative contact me at their earliest convenience." He turned to leave, then paused. "Just to be clear, what valuable items have been found? The Whitaker Trust inventories make no mention of significant valuables on the property." No one answered, and Richards departed with a polite nod, the SUV disappearing down the rural road. "I don't like coincidences," Sheriff Donovan muttered, watching the vehicle retreat. "I'll run a check on this Whitaker Heritage Enterprises. Meanwhile, Jack, you might want to secure those valuables somewhere safer than the farmhouse." After the sheriff left, Caroline turned to her brother with newfound seriousness. "I think it's time you showed me exactly what you found that's Worth someone tracking you down in the middle of nowhere. In the farmhouse basement, Caroline stared at the contents of the hidden room with uncharacteristic silence. Jack had carefully explained everything. Frederick Whitaker's European connections, the Luxembourg royal family's flight during World War II, and the historical significance of the collection that had remained hidden for over 70 years. "So, let me get this straight," Caroline finally said, examining the tiara with a banker's assessment of value rather than a historian's appreciation of significance. "You spent your last $500 on a tax auction farmhouse and stumbled onto what might be millions in royal jewelry and artifacts." "That's the simplified version," Jack admitted, "and now some family trust is questioning your ownership of the property itself." She shook her head. "Only you could turn rock bottom into this kind of complication." Jack's phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Called university contacts about Whitaker Heritage. Corporation formed 6 months ago. Thomas Jr. died 18 months ago. Something doesn't add up." Caroline, reading over his shoulder, frowned. "If the corporation was formed after Thomas Jr. died, who's really behind it?" "That's the question," Jack agreed. "And why form a corporation for a property that was headed to tax auction anyway?" They spent the evening reviewing the auction documentation. Jack had received a clean deed transfer from the county, but Caroline, with her business background, identified potential vulnerabilities. Tax auctions clear delinquent taxes, but other claims can sometimes survive the transfer, she explained. "Did you have a title search done?" Jack's expression answered for him. "Of course not," Caroline sighed. "You were buying a last resort roof over your head, not making a careful investment." The next morning brought Ray Donovan to the farmhouse with unexpected news. "That Richards fellow has been asking around town about you," he reported, helping Jack load lumber for porch repairs. "Stopped by the hardware store yesterday with photos of some fancy jewelry, asking if I'd seen anything like it. Said it was Whitaker family heirlooms missing from the estate." Jack felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "What did you tell him?" "That I sell nails and lumber, not tiaras," Ray replied dryly. "But he's been to the diner, the post office, anywhere locals might talk, offering a substantial finder's fee for information." The implications were clear. Richards knew about the royal collection, and the Whitaker heritage claim might be merely a pretext to gain legal access to the property and its hidden treasures. Eleanor arrived that afternoon with Dr. Becker and disturbing confirmation. "We've consulted with the university's legal department," she explained gravely. "Whitaker Heritage Enterprises appears to be a shell corporation with no clear connection to the Whitaker family. The registered agent is a law firm in New York specializing in art and antiquities." Dr. Becker added, "Such firms often represent private collectors seeking to acquire cultural items through legal technicalities rather than legitimate channels." The crisis crystallized that evening when Sheriff Donovan called with a warning. "Richards has filed legal papers claiming prior ownership rights to the property and all contents. There's a court hearing scheduled for next week. Until then, I'd suggest securing anything valuable off-site." After the call, Jack, Caroline, Eleanor, and Dr. Becker sat around the dining room table in somber discussion. "We have 3 problems," Caroline summarized. "First, the property ownership might be challenged. Second, someone clearly knows about the royal collection. Third, if the items are as valuable and historically significant as Dr. Becker believes, there are ethical questions about their proper disposition regardless of legal ownership." Dr. Becker nodded gravely. "My government would certainly assert claim to items of royal providence, particularly those removed during wartime, for safekeeping." Jack stared out the window at the property he'd impulsively purchased just weeks earlier. The dilapidated farmhouse had become more than shelter. It represented a connection to history and an unexpected responsibility. The treasure beneath its floorboards offered potential financial salvation, but at what cost to his integrity and the historical trust placed in Frederick Whittaker? "I think," Jack said slowly, "it's time to honor the original purpose of this place." The week before, the court hearing transformed both Jack and the farmhouse. With Caroline extending her stay to help and Eleanor mobilizing local support, Jack's isolation gave way to purposeful community action. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right," Caroline declared, her organizational skills bringing structure to Jack's improvised renovation efforts. She created spreadsheets, tracking expenses, scheduled repair priorities, and coordinated volunteer helpers Eleanor had recruited from town. Ray Donovan arrived with his brother and 2 nephews, experienced carpenters, who attacked the sagging porch with professional efficiency. "Heard you might need some help securing the place?" Ray explained simply, the rural community's way of expressing solidarity without unnecessary words. The royal collection was carefully documented by Dr. Becker and Eleanor, then temporarily relocated to a secure vault at the university under Sheriff Donovan's escort. "Chain of custody established and witnessed," the sheriff confirmed. "Whatever the court decides, no one can claim the items disappeared or were damaged." Jack's attorney, a formidable local lawyer Eleanor had recommended, reviewed the tax sale documentation and found no legitimate basis for the Whittaker heritage claim. "It's a delay tactic," she explained. "They're hoping to pressure you into a settlement that gives them access to whatever valuables they believe exist on the property." 2 days before the hearing, Dr. Becker received confirmation from Luxembourg's Cultural Ministry. The items matched those listed in the royal family's wartime evacuation inventory. The government was prepared to formally acknowledge Frederick Whittaker's role in protecting their national heritage and to negotiate with Jack for the collection's return through proper diplomatic channels. On the morning of the court date, Jack stood on the newly rebuilt porch of the farmhouse, surveying the transformation. Volunteers had repaired the roof, replaced broken windows, and cleared decades of overgrowth from the yard. The house remained far from fully restored, but it had begun to reflect its original dignity rather than its years of abandonment. "You need to decide what you want from this," Carolyn said, joining him on the porch. "The lawyer thinks we'll win against this bogus corporation, but Luxembourg has a legitimate claim to those artifacts. They'll compensate you, but it won't be what private collectors might pay." Jack nodded, watching the sunrise illuminate the fields surrounding the farmhouse. "I think Frederick Whittaker built this place for a purpose beyond just farming. He created a refuge, somewhere things of value could be protected until the world was ready for them again. And that matters to you," Caroline observed, "not a question, but a recognition." "It does," Jack confirmed. "When I lost the apartment, the business, everything I thought defined me, I was just looking for shelter. What I found was purpose." In the county courthouse, Richards appeared with 2 attorneys from his New York firm, their confident expressions faltering slightly when they saw Jack's assembled supporters. Not just Caroline and Eleanor, but Ray Donovan, Sheriff Donovan, Dr. Becker, and a dozen local residents who had helped with the farmhouse restoration. When the judge dismissed the Whittaker heritage claim as speculative at best, fraudulent at worst, Jack felt not triumph, but relief. The responsibility he had inherited with the farmhouse would continue, the responsibility not just to restore a physical structure, but to honor the legacy of protection it represented. Outside the courthouse, Richards approached Jack directly. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "My clients are prepared to make an extremely generous offer for any items of historical interest found on the property. No questions asked, no public documentation required." Jack studied the man who had tried to take his property through legal manipulation. "I think Frederick Whittaker would recognize your type," he replied. "He spent his life protecting things from people who believed money entitled them to whatever they wanted. I'm just continuing the tradition." That evening, in the farmhouse dining room, Jack signed a preliminary agreement with Dr. Becker, acknowledging Luxembourg's cultural claim to the royal collection. In return, the Luxembourg government would provide a grant for the farmhouse's complete restoration as a historical site commemorating Frederick Whitaker's role in protecting European cultural heritage during World War II. Not quite the windfall selling to private collectors might have brought, Caroline observed, as they celebrated with Eleanor and the Donovans afterward. But a much better story. 1 year later, the Whitaker Farm historical site welcomed its first official visitors. The farmhouse stood transformed, its weathered siding replaced, porch rebuilt to original specifications, and interior carefully restored to reflect both its 1940s appearance and its unique historical significance. Jack, dressed in a blazer that would have been unimaginable during his early desperate days at the property, led a small group of dignitaries through the main floor. The Luxembourg ambassador walked beside him, followed by state historical preservation officials, university representatives, and local supporters who had helped make the restoration possible. The dining room served as the main planning area, Jack explained, gesturing to the period-appropriate furniture and interpretive displays. Frederick Whitaker coordinated with European contacts here, preparing contingency plans for royal refugees while maintaining the appearance of an ordinary Kentucky farm. Eleanor, now serving as the site's historical director, added scholarly context as they moved through the house. Her position was funded through the Luxembourg Cultural Partnership, providing the professional security she had feared losing when the town museum faced budget cuts a year earlier. The tour's highlight came in the basement, where the hidden room had been preserved exactly as Jack had discovered it. A sophisticated security system now protected the space, which housed museum-quality replicas of the royal artifacts. Illuminated panels told the story of Grand Duchess Charlotte's government in exile, Frederick Whitaker's secret role in protecting Luxembourg's heritage, and the remarkable rediscovery of the collection after 7 decades. The original artifacts will return temporarily next month for our formal exhibition, Jack explained. Thereafter, they'll rotate between Luxembourg's National Museum and select international venues, always acknowledging their connection to this site and the Whitaker family's protection. As the tour concluded, Caroline appeared with refreshments for the guests. Her weekend visits had gradually expanded until she'd taken a remote position with her consulting firm, relocating to a small house in Millersburg. Her business expertise had proven invaluable in developing the historical site's sustainable operating model. "My brother omitted the most important part of the story," she told the assembled guests with a smile. "When he purchased this property, he was down to his last $500 after losing everything in the city. He thought he was buying shelter. He didn't realize he was inheriting a purpose." Jack nodded in acknowledgement, no longer embarrassed by the desperate circumstances that had led him to the tax auction. His financial situation had stabilized through the Luxembourg Restoration Grant and his position as site manager, but the real transformation had been internal, from a man fleeing failure to someone responsible for preserving an important historical legacy. After the official visitors departed, Jack found himself on the front porch with Eleanor and Ray, watching the sunset paint the Kentucky hills in golden light. Ray had become not just a hardware supplier, but a friend, his practical knowledge complementing Jack's growing restoration skills. "Thomas Whitaker Jr. would be pleased," Ray observed quietly. "He always said the farm should stay in the right hands. Guess that auction worked out exactly how it was supposed to." "What do you mean?" Jack asked. Ray shrugged. "County assessor sets the minimum bids. Thomas Jr. was friends with him for 40 years. That place could have been listed at 10 times what you paid, even in that condition." The implication hung in the evening air that perhaps Jack's lucky discovery hadn't been entirely accidental, that forces beyond random chance had guided the farmhouse into his care. Eleanor smiled knowingly. Some things find the keepers they need. As darkness settled over the property that had become his unexpected legacy, Jack reflected on the strange journey from desperate last resort to meaningful purpose. The royal treasure had ultimately returned to its rightful place, but the true value he'd discovered couldn't be measured in gold or gems. It lay in connections to history, community, and a sense of continuity that spanned generations and continents. The farmhouse lights glowed warm against the night, no longer abandoned, no longer just a shelter, but a place of genuine significance, a refuge once again serving its intended purpose. 5 years after Jack Merritt spent his last $500 on an abandoned farmhouse at a tax auction, the Whitaker International Heritage Center welcomed its 10,000th visitor. What had begun as a small historical site had evolved into a renowned cultural institution spanning 2 continents. The farmhouse itself, now impeccably restored to its 1940s appearance, formed the heart of a campus that included a modern research facility and exhibition hall built where the collapsed outbuildings had once stood. The grounds featured meticulously recreated victory gardens based on Frederick Whitaker's original plantings, now tended by local school groups as part of their history curriculum. Jack, dressed in a suit for the anniversary celebration, barely resembled the desperate man who had first turned the key in the farmhouse door. As executive director of the Whitaker Foundation, he divided his time between Kentucky and Luxembourg, overseeing cultural exchange programs and historical preservation initiatives in both locations. When I purchased this property, I had nowhere else to go, Jack admitted to the assembled guests, who included the Grand Duke of Luxembourg, state officials, and nearly the entire population of Millersburg. I was looking for shelter, not purpose, but sometimes what we need finds us regardless of what we think we're seeking. The royal collection that Jack had discovered in the hidden room now resided primarily in Luxembourg's National Museum, but key pieces regularly returned to Kentucky for special exhibitions, continuing the connection between the rural farmhouse and European royalty that Frederick Whitaker had established decades earlier. More significant than the artifacts themselves was the story they had revealed, a narrative of courage, foresight, and international cooperation during history's darkest hours. University researchers had ultimately uncovered the full extent of Frederick Whitaker's wartime activities, documenting how the unassuming Kentucky farmer had helped arrange safe passage for dozens of European refugees beyond the royal family, using his tobacco business as cover for humanitarian rescue operations. Caroline, now permanently relocated to Millersburg and serving as the foundation's financial director, joined Jack on the podium. "My brother's greatest discovery wasn't gold or jewels," she told the audience. "It was finding that value isn't always measured in monetary terms. Sometimes it's measured in the stories we preserve and the connections we maintain across time and distance." Eleanor Winters, elegant in her role as the center's historical director, had transformed from small-town curator to internationally respected authority on wartime cultural preservation efforts. Her research partnership with Dr. Becker had yielded 2 books and numerous academic publications, bringing scholarly attention to the previously overlooked role rural America had played in protecting European heritage during World War II. Ray Donovan, now retired from the hardware business but serving on the foundation's board, watched the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. His initial act of neighborly kindness, offering advice and tools to a desperate stranger, had contributed to a transformation that benefited the entire community. The Heritage Center had brought jobs, tourism, and renewed purpose to a town that had been slowly fading into economic obscurity. After the formal ceremonies concluded, Jack walked alone to the hilltop overlooking the property. The farmhouse glowed. In the evening light, windows illuminated with warmth that extended into the darkening countryside, a beacon of preservation and remembrance. From desperate last resort to internationally recognized heritage site, the journey had never followed a path Jack could have anticipated. The royal treasure had provided not the quick financial solution he'd initially hoped for, but something far more valuable, a purpose that connected him to history, community, and a legacy of protection that spanned generations. As visitors explored the grounds below, Jack reflected on Frederick Whitaker's foresight in creating a refuge designed to protect what was valuable until the world was ready to receive it again. In following that example, Jack had found not just a home but a calling, becoming not the owner of a historical treasure, but its caretaker for future generations. The farmhouse that had once been abandoned stood renewed, its long-hidden secrets now shared with the world, its purpose fulfilled in ways that honored both its past and its continuing significance in a story much larger than one man's desperate gamble on a tax auction property. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.